So I wanted to give everyone, while we're just joining, a little bit of context into what the work blueprint is all about. I spend all of my time with customers who are all trying to figure out what is this new world with AI coming in? What does that mean to work? And what's happening is it's ending up that everyone is kind of trying to get around the campfire right now to figure out, like, how do we blueprint the work? What does that mean for workforces? What does that mean in terms of our organization? And what I wanted to do was to bring the best folks into the room so that everyone can learn together and that we can share from some of the top industry experts around whether or not is they're studying this or they're doing it live or there's just so many different perspectives. I am so grateful to invite Jessica Neal to join us today. So Jessica is our first work blueprint expert. And yes, you are the first, so don't screw it up.
Okay.
I got more to come. And I mean, I want to give you some context on why Jessica is perfect to start this conversation. So, back when the industry was changing from like DVDs to now Netflix, she was right at the front of all of this change. She was the CHRO, driving not only that rapid growth and change to how work was getting done in a hyper growth environment. So she's kind of seen firsthand. So how fast, when you go from like an industry changing and an org change, their operating model was completely new. No one was working like this. So she's got this kind of first experience of like seeing like end to end how it plays out. But she also has this other expertise and job now where she sits on the investor side. So she gets access to the best technology companies in the world. She gets to see how AI is truly playing out, the capability that's happening and getting built within market. And also, I am very grateful to call her one of our advisors. And her role is she is really spending time with all of your CHROs in market who are really trying to grapple on what this new world looks like. So, Jessica, a massive welcome to the Work Blueprint. And again, really grateful to have you as part of this like first pioneering conversation that we're bringing to the world. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm so honored to be the first, and I'm excited to not blow it.
So I would love you to, and by the way, these kind of blueprints are very raw, very open, very honest. So for folks listening in, either you're listening live now or you're listening after on your Peloton, whatever, like the purpose of these is like we're trying to like lift the lid a little bit on like what it's actually feeling like. Because most people are kind of either nervous, terrified, trying to get information. So a lot of this is just like live what we're thinking, what we're learning. I mean, Jessica, it would be incredible for you to share a little bit of context and like what was that journey like when you look back to that moment when you accepted the offer at Netflix, you realized that this was a thing. Like talk us through like that moment to like what like how did that whole thing feel as like leading the people side of the business?
Well, I started when I was very young, I'll just say that, in 2006. And I wasn't the CHRO then. I spent my career growing up at Netflix, but I came in to run recruiting for them. And one of the challenges that they had at the time was that they were having a very hard time attracting the talent to make the shift from DVD to streaming. So they needed these amazing engineers that understood how to build a streaming system. The internet was just starting to be able to actually stream video. It couldn't do it very, very well, but we needed a group of people that could figure it out. And then, we needed we already had within the product deep machine learning capabilities around personalization and search and things like that, but we needed even more of that. And so, when people thought about Netflix, they thought about, a DVD company, and no good engineer wanted to work for a DVD
Mm,
company. They all wanted to, at the time, they all wanted to work for Google. And so the challenge was really to build the talent strategy to attract the type of folks that would help make this pivot and transformation. And then, as we were scaling and growing the company, that led to us going global and not just being a domestic US company. And so that was a different talent strategy than to us making content. And so instead of licensing it, now we're producing content and now we
mhm.
have people on sets and we're, all around the world filming TV shows and movies. And that was a completely different talent strategy. And so there were so many different transformations and pivots that the company had. And, as many of you know, we've become the largest entertainment company in the world. But a big reason that we were able to accomplish all of those things is not only because of the talent that we had, but because of how we worked. And I actually think that maybe, and this isn't me just blowing smoke up my, but I think we were ahead of the times because I think in this world of, AI and the changes that it's making not only with work, but with what you might deem as talent for your organization is changing. And but it's something that we valued then. And
Hmm.
we hired people that had tremendous judgment, that could make decisions and ambiguity, right? We hired people that um, were driven and passionate about the problem. And I think, what I'm learning and what I think a lot of other organizations are learning is that you don't maybe need the person or lots of people to do lots of execution, because a lot of that execution is or will be done through AI. But you do need people that have enormous ability to cipher through all of that data, because
Hmm.
there's a lot, and decide what to do in the lens of your values, in the lens of your mission, and to own whether it goes well or not. And
Hmm.
I've been thinking a lot about the impacts this is placing, not just with individual contributors within the organization, but with leaders. Because you need leaders now that aren't, maybe you don't need the functional expertise leader who's really good operationally. I think you need a leader that's, you know, willing to work outside a frame, like
Hmm.
not just a great executor, like a great ideator, like a great, you know, vision around something. And then you also need a leader that's going to be, a multiplier in terms of the impact that they're having on the team. Can they attract people? Do people want to work with them? Are they inspiring? Can they develop people? Like those are the skills that I think are going to be massively more important. And it's just been interesting because I've been reflecting back on, what we focused on, and those were a lot of the things that we focused on that a lot of other companies
Hmm.
maybe didn't value as much. And so I just kind of find that to be interesting.
I think one of the things that I've kind of learned from just talking to you over the years is like you were very deliberate in how you structured work as well. So not
Mhm.
only were you kind of like creating a new platform essentially, like there's kind of like I know this sounds like silly because they're two different things, but where you were moving from like DVD to streaming was new platforming skills. It's the same thing of like everyone now converting into large language models. So there
Yeah.
was this like shift in like once in a generation change at that moment, which you guys were pioneering, which I thought was like really important for kind of looking forward to is there any common things that we're learning from your journey to where we're at now? But the one thing that I kind of learned from just the time of tracking you and watching your work was like how deliberate you were in terms of the that and that wasn't even with AI in the mix. So I
No,
think
yeah.
when you look kind of at around your peer group right now at a CHRO level and you get to advise the top CHROs in the top companies in the world, like what are the things that they're kind of freaking out a little bit about? Like what are the things are you thinking that people are worried about? Like what are the things that like are you seeing sort of come up in those conversations? Because everyone talks, and it's kind of getting a little bit frustrating that we talk so much about the AI part.
Yeah.
But the reality is, like, not many major companies are going to have end to end AI. Therefore, they still require humans in the loop, which means the human part is very important.
Yeah.
So like that's the part I think I would be really interested, to hear your view. Like, what are you hearing from all of your peers?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks are very excited about the opportunities that AI is creating for the organizations, but and people in general, but there's also, I think, a bit of anxiety, right?
Hmm.
Because um, there's no one organization that any of us can point to that has got it figured out. Like, no, we're all learning as we go. And so I think not having the answers is a little nerve-wracking. Plus, there's a bunch of pressure being felt from the board, from the CEO to really figure this out. And I think the companies that are maybe doing a little better than others are the ones that I really see focusing on a framework of AI led versus human led. They're really going through the work and looking at it and assessing it. And I think, this is part of your mission at Rejig, but I think really looking at not just a role, but task
Yeah.
and like how work is getting done. And they're looking at it through a lens of AI led or human led.
Hmm.
And I would also say they're looking through this also with the lens of their values and their mission, right? And then also it's a team of folks across the company at a high level that include the CHRO, the CIO, the chief product officer, the CTO in some cases. And that team is really aligned on this framework, and then
Hmm.
they're aligned on the things that perhaps they are trying within the organization and their approach. And I think that those organizations are having a bit more success than the ones where it's a it's a thing in the CIO world, and they're just pushing out some different products and things, and people are trying them and experimenting them with them that's not sticking, or it's just the CHRO's responsibility, and it's sort of the same thing. um and they don't really have that, sort of framework agenda, and it's a shared responsibility across,
Hmm.
the organization. I see that being a little bit more fragmented and less successful.
Like one of the things that I've seen, which kind of sounds a bit like counterintuitive, like what I'm going to say, but the tech companies are the ones that you read about in the news who are apparently automating out their whole company to the point they don't need HR vibes. That's the crappy story
Which
in
is
the press.
not true.
No, it's bullshit. Total
Yeah.
bullshit. They're usually
Yeah.
selling you an AI.
Yeah.
Literally, if you like scratch the surface and all of this stuff, like really it comes down to the story they're telling is usually correlated to an AI that can do some part of that work.
Right.
That's like it's that obvious, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, let's say you've got that on one side, you've got the tech companies and the startups who apparently have like completely AI their company and blah blah blah. And then you have everyone thinks that the big large enterprises are the ones that are the slow. What's really interesting, and I've worked for both, and I
Yeah.
am also a startup. I
Yes.
am building a $1 billion company with under 100 people. I'm halfway to that goal, right? What I have noticed is the enterprises were slower to the game, not because the want wasn't there, but because from a governance perspective, they weren't. If you sell medicine, if you are, a hospital, if you are a bank, you're gonna have to vibe code a bank. Do you know what I'm saying? Like there is like restrictions in place that, they're not going to go out and do that. What has become really interesting is when you read in the press, you think that the tech companies are so aggressively ahead of the big corporates. But what I've actually found is that's not super true because the tech companies have went out and their strategy was everybody, I'm going to give you a tool and everybody's going to go and automate how you work. And individually, you can work whatever the hell way you want as long as you're token maxing and you're, using AI, like you'll be great. what has actually happened is not only have they spent way more money than what it costs for the people. But actually, like if you imagine everyone's in the rowing boat and everyone's going in a different direction, like the work is slowing down and it's
Hmm.
chaos. So I actually think when I look at comparing the two customer bases, that the slower governed world actually has a little bit of like an interesting view that everyone thinks it's super negative. The enterprises are the ones that are being more intentional about the design
Yeah.
of the work versus the tech companies. So I think like I don't know like if you
Well, it's sort of
agree or
like the Wild West versus, like, a very well-run kingdom.
well and like don't get me wrong, the corporates have like all these other
Yeah.
things about like compliance and risk and even deploying an
Yeah.
agent.
They have to do
But
it that way.
if I was like to kind of look at the orgs, I'm actually going to bet that these guys are the ones that are going to win over these guys.
Yeah.
That's
I
if
mean,
I was betting.
it could be. I mean, look, like I think the opportunity that a lot of startups have is that they are getting to build with AI first. Like you're getting to do this
Yeah,
at your
like me. Like I
company.
get to design it completely different.
Right. And that's exciting. That's fun, but it gives you a different advantage than these other organizations, which are very large, very complex, and to your point, do have different compliance and regulatory restrictions where they can't just scrap it and
Yeah.
start from scratch. And they have, hundreds of thousands to millions of customers depending on them. Um,
Yeah.
so it's a different problem for sure, but I see opportunity in both. I
Hmm.
see I, I see, I was trying to think of a nice way to say it. I see mistakes happening on both sides, you
Yeah,
know.
true.
Yeah.
True.
You
The,
know.
the the other where it's really interesting for like our listeners generally will be, HR folks, right? And I actually see that in the corporate, more larger enterprise, that the role of HR becoming these kind of like work designers, work architects is like
Hmm.
super critical. Because
Yeah.
in the tech world, it's like throw a tool out there and we'll figure it out. Whereas we have to be more intentional, which means we have to redesign the work. So we're starting to see this like emerging team form within big
Hmm.
companies, which is all like workforce innovation, work architecture, work design, whatever you want to call it. But I think everyone collectively knows like multi-billion-dollar companies right now are being born from the idea of like solutions consulting and like forward deploying, right? Like you look at all of those investments that have just been made into like building these consulting practices to go in and forward deploy. Everybody knows that you can't just throw the AI out there hoping for the best and like it'll stick. Everyone's recognizing now that I've got to understand my task, I've got to re-engineer the workflow. So there's this role where we're seeing HR now playing into the space. It's kind of like the skills folks, job architecture folks, org effectiveness folks are now kind of cloning into this new kind of version of like work innovation, which we're starting
Yeah.
to see play out across pharmaceutical, banking, insurance, retail, CPG. And it's starting to theme like, do you think that like, where do you think like HR's rule more broadly? Like if you were back in an operating model and you were designing out for one of the big companies, like how would you be thinking about team?
Yeah, I mean, and some days I wish I was back in that role because I feel like it's just so cool. Like the opportunity that these folks have to figure out something so crazy and evolutionary, and to be at the forefront of that, I think is just a massive privilege,
I
and so
agree.
Some days I wish, but most days I'm like, thank God I don't have that job anymore. So, I think that, look, I think a lot of value that was put into an HR's teams uh, was around, administration, comms, de-risking, compliance, those things. And those things are incredibly important. And you had these very large teams that would handle these things. As our work shifts in our function, those things are going to maybe be taken care of via AI. And I would just really encourage the teams that are out there right now that, are doing some of this work as to really, you know, push yourself to go as far as you can personally go with AI and not to be afraid of it. And get to be in the business, right? And
Hmm.
I think when you really understand the business and really what you're talking about, whether it's you're doing it in the world of AI or what we were doing at Netflix, you're designing work, you're designing how the organization is going to be effective, right? And I never thought about my job as being an HR person. I don't know. I like
Hmm.
fell into HR. I don't even like saying HR. I think it sounds weird and, antiquated.
Hmm.
So if one of you out there comes up with a better term than HR or
True.
people or
Yeah.
talent, I'd love
Yeah.
it. So, send us your thoughts. But I thought about myself as being a chief effectiveness officer. And I think if you're approaching the organization and designing the organization around what's going to make people the most effective, that's just a really cool way to approach it. And then that is going to have a meaningful impact on the bottom line. And so you're really going to have to look at how work is getting done. You're going to have to look at task. You're going to have to look at structure and design of the org. And if you can figure out that massive puzzle, the impact on the amount of ROI that the organization is going to get from that, not just for the people, but from the bottom line, it's going
Hmm.
to be massive. And so you have this massive opportunity to be a meaningful impactor to the P&L if you're approaching it as how do we become the most effective? How do we take the friction out of work? How do we amplify our people? How do we amplify decisions? How do we amplify revenue? Like those are all the things that I would be dying to solve, right?
I love this. I love this. And like, we've been co-partnering on a couple of customers together, and the strategy that we're like working through. And I love this chief effectiveness officer as well. And I do think there has to be some evolution of how we are as a team. Because I think people think the HR team is this like police
Yeah,
policy thing,
yeah,
when it's like it needs a rebrand. I agree. So yes, we need to all collectively agree to rebrand this thing. But what I'm seeing and what you're seeing on this work that we're looking at is like, if you imagine that, how we make money and then where we spend money is basically how business runs, really simply. So it's like, how do we help reinvent the stuff and amplify, to your language, the tasks that help us make more money? So let's focus on where do we make money as a company, and how do we do more of that? And then we look at like, what are the tasks that are kind of lower value that cost us money, and how do we remove those? And
exactly.
then there's this like third pillar, which is really starting to pop out now as well. Just because a task can be automated doesn't mean we should. So one of the algorithms I've now built into Rejig is I can now tell you what tasks you should not remove. Because if you remove them, you will remove the expertise building in your company, which will impact your bench.
Yeah,
So some things are like, if you're like a sales development rep, you got to do that time and do your laps in order to become a good salesperson. If you want to have like be a tax auditor, you got to do your laps and learn how to read and do the audits before you become the auditor. So there's like expertise that is really critical for our organization. So I think there's this like triangulation between like, how do we make more money? How do we save money? How do we protect the company around like certain things? Because in
yeah.
all of the
What's
custom,
that
all the people,
human? It's that human led versus AI led.
well, and you're never going to have like a vibe coded bank where there's no people. So the reality is you got to have like expertise still in your company.
Yeah.
So don't remove. There was a whole thing, we're doing a whole pile of work, and I'll not get into the detail of it, but like even in the government where they removed welders
Hmm.
and they automated that, they now can't find welders.
Yeah.
Like in the retailers where they removed bakeries.
Yeah.
and bakers. They now have this critical expertise gap. So there's this thing that we got to all remember that like we run towards the AI fire, sure, but don't forget that like in 5 years' time, you don't want to be screwed where you don't have the expertise because someone has to monitor the agents. Like you
Yeah.
have to have like human in the loop to do that. So I think like that's what we're kind of seeing play out.
Yeah. And I think, it's, and speaking of managing the agents, I mean, it's really interesting because everybody's a manager now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like whether it's a person or an agent, like you're managing.
Yeah.
And I mean, you and I both know this, and many people listening know this too. Like, not all people are great managers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're managing, I think it's going to be very interesting to look at performance, 5 years from now, because your workforce is going to be humans, of course, and it's going to be agents. And, you know, who's responsible for the performance of the agents? Is it the people that's managing them?
Yeah.
That's that's my guess. And, if you're coaching an agent to do not the right things, you're not going to get great performance. I don't know. It's all very fascinating.
It's and you know the privilege that I get to have is I get to sit on both sides. I get to sit in with the customers who are sleeves rolled up in live doing it, and I get to build the technology.
Yeah.
So I have this like you talk about privilege of sitting in a role. Like I have the ultimate privilege. This is why I feel a responsibility to share everything I'm learning
Hmm.
because like a lot of it is bullshit and a lot of it is noise. So it's like,
Yeah.
how do you tell people really what's happening so that they don't feel like they're out of the loop or they're lost or that they're not getting left behind? And there was a really good question that came into the chat as well. So the question was after work redesign, how intentional are companies about the change management and enablement and measurement of adoption and changes in both processes and output by humans and willing to invest in these? And I think like I can take a first crack about what I see real time in customers right now. And like this is I'm going to give you like a philosophical step up for a second thought and then I'm going to tell you reality. If you imagine that this is a change to work forever, like this is not a one time change management program that we're doing where we bring in a consultant and we do this once. This is a forever change to work. It will be continuous. The agents get stronger. Once you update a workflow, you're going to upgrade it again once the technology gets stronger. This is a forever. So, like, we're not doing this once. Everyone needs to be clear on that. Because I talk to some customers and they're like, once I do this, and I'm like, no, like, once you do this, you open the whole can of worms of all the other things that you're going to do. And so there's this like, it's going to change. That means that how we do change management in our companies has to change. Change management design typically in our world is designed on this like one-time programmatic view of like I do this change management program. What you have to build as a capability within your business is stealth change management. So think about like when your iPhone upgrades, it's like work will upgrade like your iPhone upgrades. So we've got to get our people used to and comfortable with the idea that work will evolve continuously. And you as an organization, and this is where again, HR is so critical, not just on the work redesign, but to make sure our people are equipped to do the job. In regions in Europe, for instance, if you do not put and make sure your people are able to adopt the new way of working, you are in trouble because you are putting that employee in a situation where they can't, like, they don't know how to be successful in their job. So there's this whole thing around how do you make sure that your people, if I go and I reinvent how invoicing is paid within my company, and let's say 1,000 people do that at scale, that's 1,000 people that need to be shown the new way of working. So one of the things that like I'm really working with customers on is like let's move away from change management into stealth change management. And how do we create this continuous evolution in our orgs and really look at that and to the I'm not sure who was put in the question because it's come from my team, but the other part of it is then and you should measure that adoption not based on how many times people are logging in to Copilot, let's say, it's actually how much has work changed? Like, is the invoice used to take us like 7 minutes, now two? Like, we can see changes based on like output of like velocity and things getting done faster. Or I only need 20 people to do that now, which meant those other couple of hundred people can get pivoted into all other more meaningful work. So that's kind of my take, Jessica. I don't know if like you agree on that, like, or you have a different perspective, but I feel super strongly about change management just feels like the dinosaurs. and it's a bit old and crusty. And there's this like kind of new age version of change that we have to get our orgs used to.
Yeah, I do feel I feel very similar to you. I think, I've been thinking about this a lot, and it's a little bit around change management, but a little different. I think eh, the way that most organizations have been working, whether it's around change or decisions that they're making, a lot of it is a lot of the ways that are built for people to work are more about not taking risk and de-risking things and doing things the same way. And that's why, we kind of have change management because, of course, there's always change, right? So I think as much as we can get our organizations to embrace that, the way that we're going to be working every minute maybe right is going to be different from the next because the algorithms are going to continue to get better and better and better, and our work is going to continue to be impacted by that. Our organizations are going to shift at a more massive rate. When you look at you know, sort of the evolution that happened with growth within companies
Hmm.
pre-AI, and then you look at some of the growth with the companies that are, sort of AI first agentic companies, like their path to 100 million versus the path to 100 million a few years ago, dramatically different. So companies are reaching
So,
100 million in a year or two, whereas that took 10 plus years
yeah.
before. So, running $100 million company versus a $30 million company, it's very different. And so those things are just the rate of change is just happening so fast. So I think if we cannot get our organizations prepared emotionally and mentally and from a work perspective, like how we're going to do this, it's going to be very choppy and hard and a big slog. Um, and look, nobody likes change, right?
Yeah.
Everybody likes things to stay comfortable and the same. But if your company isn't going to get left behind and your people aren't going to get left behind, you really have to infuse this way of thinking and this behavior, like in how you operate, because today you might make decisions through consensus.
Hmm.
That's probably not going to be effective and efficient
Yeah,
now.
but it comes back to your point, like what makes money? What do we lose money on? Like
Yeah,
I think a lot of folks kind of do this like soft and fluffy thing or use case selection. Like we should be making decisions based on data. Like
yeah,
where do we make money? What's the work? Amplify it. Where do we lose money? Stop the risk. Like it's literally like that simple. And it sounds
yeah,
when I talk about this with customers, I'm like, stop crowdsourcing ideas. You put a massive backlog in there and it's all crap. It's not even valuable stuff. And usually like it's stuff that's just like the tiniest thing that maybe might be an annoying task, but it doesn't cost you any money. It's like what something you do once a month,
yeah,
like it's like not even
yeah.
valuable.
And I think, as you were talking, I was just thinking about something that I think is going to become increasingly more important, especially with this evolution and all the change, is companies have got to get really good at being clear and
Hmm.
communicating what's important and what's not. And leaders especially have to be very good at explaining the why behind what we're
Yeah.
doing, what we are doing, how we are going to do it. And a lot of companies and organizations just aren't great at that, right? And
Yeah.
if you go a layer, even if you go a layer below the sea level, oftentimes people have very different views on what the goals are. And the further you get down the organization, the
Yeah.
worse that is. And so I really think that communication and clarity are going to have to be a big part of what organizations get good at.
So you know what? You just like so there's something I'm gonna you don't need to know the perfect answer to this, but I'm gonna tell you a live problem that I have.
Okay.
I have several customers who have been sold AI And they
Okay.
promised that they would unlock X amount of millions of hours across their employee base. And what has happened is they've brought in these workflows, they've done the agents, but no one can find the R's that were apparently being unlocked. And I think a lot of it has been that the employees will fill their time up with other stuff they think is important. Like,
Mhm.
imagine that most employees' intent is good and they think they're doing good work and trying to do the right thing for the company. How would you communicate to the employees? Like, so if I know that I'm going to reinvent how the invoice is being paid, and I know if a couple hundred people do that, I know that it's going to probably unlock 2 hours a day. Like, who is having that conversation with the employee to say that, like, this is changing, and then how do I take that capacity, like, how do we work through that, because that's a real thing that people are getting a bit cranky about, because they're like, well, we're spending all this money but I can't see the R's that everyone's saying. Like, how would you, and most of it's just usually like no one has told the employee, like, how would you manage that
Yeah, because they don't know.
situation?
They haven't
Sorry,
had
this
a
is like a it's
conversation.
like a therapy session for me, because like I'm like trying to solve that problem, right? So would love your take.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you got to the problem at its core is that employees don't know. No one is talking to them about this, and the business isn't being clear. And you have a bunch of leaders who are also not clear. And so the what and the why isn't getting explained.
Mm,
And therefore the how, it's all confused, right? And so uh, I think communication is a major plague across many, many, many companies. And it is one of the reasons why a lot of companies get slow and bureaucratic and all these things because they just have all these people really not contributing to the core of the thing, right? And
yeah,
it's not, to your point, I think employees and managers and everyone are well intended,
yeah.
but and they're doing the best that they can with the information that they have. But often the information that they have is not the right information.
Hmm.
And so I think that, if you really want to do this well, you have to help your managers and your leaders get good at explaining this to their organizations and their people. You have to get good at explaining it to them. And, I think with what I would do if I had people, let's say we're your invoicing example, and it's like, okay, so I used to spend my whole day on invoices. Now I have 2 free hours. What should I be doing with those 2 free hours? Well, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to learn
Hmm.
this. I'd like you to spend time thinking about X. But employees don't know that. And so they're doing what, again, they're maybe spend their time doing some other things that maybe aren't important to their amplification and maybe certainly aren't important to the company's amplification. But I think, if you have more of the how, for those specific roles. And I think one of the things we're going to have to get very, very good at is teaching people in our workforce how to have judgment, how to make good decisions. There's a lot of talk out there about, entry level work and like,
Hmm.
we're not going to need entry level workers. It's like, well, I don't think so. But what if instead of thinking about it as entry level per se, you think about it as, you're teaching the next generation of the workforce. And what does that mean for your organization? And maybe the the workers that you hire, because let's assume that functional expertise isn't as important, right? Execution on certain task isn't as important, but judgment is, learning this craft is, to your bakery example, right?
Yeah,
Like maybe they need to learn the craft of auditing. Maybe they need to learn the craft of product. Maybe they need to learn the craft. Maybe they learn all of those things because you
yeah,
rotate them around, right? So I think, again, we need to think, we need to kind of zoom out of what's happening today and really think about what's going to be successful 5 years from now. And it's very hard to think 5 years from now, but I think that would be sort of the lens that I would be trying to apply is because like let's think about the what ifs. What if this stuff
Hmm.
doesn't exist anymore? What am I going to hire people to do? Am I, you know? And I think you are still going to hire people and you still need people that know how to do things. The things that you need them to know how to do are just different than what you need them to do today. Because
Hmm.
again, most organizations grew and scaled because they needed more and more execution, right? We need more tasks. We need, so more
Yeah.
invoices to send. So you need more people to send those invoices, and those are all tasks. But to your point, maybe a lot of that work goes away, but then there's more work created from a decision-making perspective, a
Yeah.
judgment perspective. And maybe you have more generalists in your workforce than you do,
Yeah.
specific, task executors.
The other thing that happens is like, let's say you've got a job, let's say it's a financial controller who's responsible for the invoice paying. Sure, you're removing certain tasks, but you introduce new tasks that you haven't had to do before because of the agent. So
Yeah.
this is the part where people don't realize it's a little bit like Jenga. Like you're kind of like, I get these like kind of crazy big like newspaper stuff where people are like, oh, the job, like this entry level thing. I call bullshit again on that. Like, that's not true. I think it's definitely going to be more difficult for, younger generation to come into the workforce just because there's this perception that we don't need to hire this level. And the fastest way to make their cuts is to not hire in. It's just to let the talent retention go down and natural attrition. That's what basically the game people are playing right now, in my
I
opinion.
agree.
That
Yeah.
they're like, let's keep our head count flat and grow. That's the bet, so they don't have to do the big head count cuts. That's what I think is happening. But like, there's not really a lot of jobs and I'm talking about enterprise, like proper big companies here, because startups are not a good example. Like enterprises are not going to just rapidly have all of these jobs getting removed. What's going to happen is that they're going to evolve. They'll
Yeah.
just chop and change. They won't be like completely gone. And you're going to see like re-engineering happening quite a bit across the job profiles as well. So I think like what you're saying is like totally true. But part of the problem for folks right now is like what's real and perception versus the media is just so toxic on its opinion, because look at all the media. It's like people selling you a tool and they dominate the whole press. And I think like that's where it's like tricky because managers are reading that stuff. People are
Yeah.
going into boardrooms and going, well, if Facebook's done this, we can
Yeah.
do that. Like,
Right.
why are we not doing that? Elon cut 87% of his workforce and the tech's still running. Let's do the same. Like, it's kind of like where you get that tension coming down, and then there's the actual reality. There was a question that came in about the kind of spicy point of view about when I said about the tech companies. So you mentioned enterprise companies are moving more slowly and intentionally, and you're betting on them. What advice would you provide to tech companies to improve and strengthen their approach instead of typically throwing it at AI at everyone and operating independently? I think there's two things, and like chime in here, Jessica, if you kind of have a different view. But I think you have to create a sandbox for people to individually be able to be creative. I think the difference between people using Claude and OpenAI, those tools are individual productivity tools. They are not typically workflow tools. They are help me code faster, help me do a nicer presentation, help me reply to emails. What I look at in an org is like, how does the core workflows of the business run where I've got like lots of people on them? So I would say like, let your people do things over here that are kind of isolated to their kind of common ways of working. But anything that is critical to making money, saving money, risk, like that's your AI workflow. Like, how do I reinvent that? So I think the viewpoint that I would say is like do an analysis of like the opportunity based on task, subtask, look at your agents, see what agents are actually allowed in your environment. And then I would pick the things that are the most valuable and I'd go and reinvent those and let your teams kind of like do those like individual productivity things. There is a very misconception in market that like everyone thinks that Claude and OpenAI is like doing all of these crazy things. They're not. They're making the individual a bit more productive. But the real unlock for an organization is like when you reinvent the workflow, whether it's like Copilot Studio in an enterprise where you can like every 100 people are now working in this new way, or you're redesigning with like a Workday, with a backend service now, et cetera, et cetera. Like they're kind of going to be the places where value and true dollars and R's are being unlocked. I don't know, Jessica, if you've got a
No, I
different
think
view on.
I think that's right. I would answer it very similarly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's another question as well that's come in. Um, Recently, I've come across several articles questioning the long term sustainability of AI, citing concerns about both energy consumption and cost. Given these potential constraints, should organizations be redesigning all of their process and systems around AI, or is a more targeted approach warranted if AI solutions ultimately prove scalable and economic sustainable? I mean, I'm going to give you that one.
Well, I mean, I, I I think AI is here to stay, right? I do think that there is an infrastructure problem, but I think a lot of money is going to be thrown at that, and that's going to create a lot more jobs, right? Um, so there may be some bumps in the road, but I would not be hedging for that. I would be building, and innovating to amplify my workforce,
Mhm.
because the train is moving, and the train is moving quite fast. So again, there is an infrastructure problem and there's economics to figure out, but some very rich, wealthy, smart people are going to be all over.
Yeah.
Investment dollars are going to go into those, companies to solve those problems, and yeah. So
Yeah.
so I
The
wouldn't I
biggest
wouldn't hedge against it.
the biggest issue I think right now today is that companies are just like they've got no real clear plan. So they're probably blowing out a lot of their budgets because they're kind of throwing it at a wall, hoping something sticks.
Yeah.
So like I'm not an expert in the impact of AI into energy, et cetera, but the stuff I'm an expert in is like how does this impact the work and the workforces? And the thing I would say is the big problem that folks are having, and most CFOs are freaking out about right now, is that like like in some instances customers have deployed agents and AI workflows that are costing them more than the people they displaced, right? That's real.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and that's a like token maxing, like everybody was given a leaderboard who can like smash the most tokens and spend the most money on AI, which was just stupid. Like, why would you even do that? But that was their weird way of trying to incentivize people to like
Yeah.
adopt AI versus, and that's again back to the tech companies, right? Like I've got lots of opinions on that. And I'm one of the tech companies, so I feel like I can say that. I also think like there's a really funny chat going on. Like my accent is really hard to understand when I say ours. So people are like, what do you mean by ours? So like the ROI, sorry, Marianne, I was like so struggling to understand what you meant. Like when I say ours and when I say skills, it sounds like Skittles. So people like are like, what? So what I was saying was that the unlock of a proper reinvention of a job or workflow is actually the R's, as in HOURS. So like,
Hours.
yes, I can't say it. Hours. So, like, have we unlocked hours? Like, how
Yes.
much
I
time are we
understood you,
giving back?
girl. I got you.
Yeah, you've hung around me enough. I got this
Yes.
weird, like, Irish, Australian, American weirdness going on with my
Tuxin.
accents. It's
Tuxin.
like, yeah, we'll cut
Tucson,
that part out.
Arizona. Well, that is
um,
Tucson is a little deceiving because of the sea, but yeah.
well, there's another one in America I look at and I can't even remember what it is because my mind blanks when I see it and I have to worry that I have to say it out loud on a call. But there's like lots of words that I look at and I'm like, I don't know how to say this. But I think the thing that I love about your expertise and I love about sort of Jessica, the way you see things is like, I mean, we met because of your role within the tech space and like sitting alongside and watching the AI movement. And we were early, as you know, we were first.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that I love about your expertise is you've both been at the helm of like this rapidly changing department. And I think the kind of stuff that you're talking about not only is like I've seen it and played it and I've got the suitcase that's kind of rolled up with me because I've got it. But I think when we come into this new era, I am so passionate about career pathing in this space. I think this is HR's moment to
Yeah.
like completely like reinvent ourselves.
Hmm.
And I think that like there's so many people that will be on this call, there's so many people that are so kind of fed up with like the way that we get boxed in at the HR side. And I have so many conversations with investors that pisses me off. They're like, oh, but that's a HR thing. And I'm like, it is not a HR thing. Like, this is not a HR thing. This is actually like, if you imagine that the companies today are paying for all these external people to come in and tell them how to reinvent their company, do you not think that that's crazy? Like, these people
Yeah.
have never reinvented a company before, but they're on the outside looking at your company telling you how to do it with no expertise because this is all new. So
Yeah.
my vision and my whole like excitement comes to everybody on this call, everybody listening to this. Like, this is your moment to own this new era for us to build the capability internally. I'm also seeing across customers, and I don't know if you've seen this as well, CIOs now reporting to CHRO. It's becoming this new evolution, which is the most exciting thing because we are not just looking at capacity in our org as people, we're looking at agent and human capacity.
Yeah.
Like, what, give me, like, what do you think about like that? And I get very excited, part of me, like, of this topic because I am like so ready for us to have this moment as an industry. So, like, take it away. Tell us where we're going.
Good Lord, I don't know if I can do that. But just like I was saying earlier on, like I would be so excited to be in this role right now. I think it is like the opportunity for us to really show the value and the impact of us being a strategic partner in the business and impacting the bottom line is like no other. And the fact that you see roles like a CIO role coming into HR becoming, the chief operating officer. I do think, and this is a different topic, but many CHROs should be the CEO in
Mhm.
many ways of the company. Because really, once you have a product and idea, it is it is architecting the way that you will operate and work that makes the difference. When you look at these successful companies, whether it's Amazon or Apple or Netflix or, you know, whoever, the ones that are truly successful have figured out how to hire the right talent, deploy them on the right things to make a massive impact, and they have an excellent operating culture. Be it all very different from one another, they have
Mhm.
excellent operating culture. And that's where I think we're being pushed to go. And we have to figure out this operating model and this new construct. And I think it is so exciting. And so for all of you that are sitting in the seat, um, dive in. You know,
Yeah,
like
this is it.
don't be scared about it. Dive in and prove why you're there and that you are a true partner to the business.
You know what I've seen is massive. Like, I completely underestimated this and didn't see it. And I hosted like a whole pile of my customers for what we call Pioneers Club, which is where they all get together and we like share and learn. And every single customer in the room was talking about the role of the HR business partner in this new world. Like, think, and I just didn't, I was always thinking about this core team that was doing the reinvention. But actually, in every kind of major org, the HR business partner is the direct line into the business that owns the relationship with the leaders. And they're fielding all of these questions around, what is my workforce going to look like? What will be the impacts? Like, where's the, like, so there's this really interesting thing that I think we're going to see, like, also this evolution of the HR business partner as
Yeah.
well, because they are like moving from like generalists kind of like role into now being requested to like lead in this moment. And a lot of what I'm trying to get my head around is like, what is the operating model for us as like a HR team to operate in this? And I see a couple of different playbooks happening in customers. And like, I serve the big and most complex, again, not startups. So like when I'm looking at like orgs, they either have a small like COE, which is like a workforce innovation, work strategy, whatever you want to call it, small like team. They're like Navy SEALs. They drop in and out of the company and they're dropping into departments, usually alongside HR business partner. And what they are doing is they are advising on like where the AI opportunity exists. They're then looking at like modeling the AI impact. We're in beta right now with some customers where we're modeling as well, like the cost per agent versus cost per people so that they're not making that mistake of like pulling people out and it's going to be more expensive. So they're kind of sitting at that like this Navy SEAL and then the activation there is the HRBP. And then I have these other customers that have like large teams of like, let's say 50 people that are also looking at like org wide effectiveness and like helping all the business lines. And in those models, I'm seeing a couple of core skills pop out. So, what the tech market would call forward deploying engineers, we in HR would probably look at that as work design. Like they're calling it the sexy thing, which is a forward deployed engineer basically goes ahead and looks at like telephones people and asks them, how do you do this? Interviews them, watches the process. Guys, that's all it is. That's forward deploying is not like this like super crazy thing. What they're trying to do is understand how work runs, pull that back, and then design the feature. That's a work designer. So in HR, you're starting to see this new role popping up, which is like this work designer. So you're going to have HRBPs that are like kind of generalists, but also have an ability to communicate and tell with data. You're going to have your work designers and your work architects. The job architecture people in enterprises, they're having another moment where what was used to be a compliance thing and that you just needed a job architecture for like paying people and like reward and all of that stuff is becoming this like hot and sexy thing where the company wants to know. So there's this like work designer, there's these work architects, and then to the chat here as well, like the CHRO role, I actually agree with you that it becomes more of a chief effectiveness. I think we need to find like a different name, but it's that. It's like,
Yeah.
I know my agent capacity, I know my people capacity, and how do I maximize the moment to make sure that everyone can like, work together? And there was a question that came through as well, like in terms of like thinking about human agent teaming, like, have you any views on like when you're thinking about teams? I know you spoke a little bit about like people now needing to be managers of agents. Like, have you any views on like how you would be doing team design?
Um, I mean, yes and no. So, I know somebody sort of, I think, mentioned like Five Dysfunctions or something, which by the way is a great book. So yeah, I think AR, no II, great book to read and think about that for your team. But I think when we're talking about like work and agents and humans and who's doing what, I think my guess is that inherently the hierarchy becomes more flat, because you don't need, maybe you don't need as many leaders, you don't need as many VPs because you don't need as many big teams. So I think the design and teams kind of get flatter, but ownership and impact grows because, maybe you're, I'm just making stuff up, but maybe you're a product designer, but now you're also doing product management, and maybe you are doing a bit of coding as well, because I think we're all going to learn how to do this, right? So maybe you're a builder, you're a designer, and a product manager, and so I
Hmm.
think some of the works are blending into one another versus you sort of had these, very much like, okay, we need this and we need a team of this and then we need a team that does this. And so I think some of that's blending. And so maybe, you don't need, five product designers, maybe you need two. And,
Hmm.
you don't need a whole team of product managers, maybe you need one. And then the product designers are also helping out in that. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up, but that's my guess, is that things become less hierarchical, things
Yeah.
become more flat, and people become more generalist and more owners of work.
Yeah. And like lesson that we learned, we moved away from like structured R&D. So we had
Hmm.
product managers, we had engineers, we had designers,
Hmm.
etc. We turned it into this like team of like builders.
Right.
And the good story was shipping faster, wrapped around AI. You've got people taking accountability end to end, which meant velocity went up. The bad part of that was that we didn't realize that when you give people AI and say, like, go and code as fast as you can and build the most incredible things, that there's other things that you need to add into their ways of working. And when you code and you use like tools to code with, like, sometimes if you're not careful, like you're not writing the code, therefore you're shipping stuff that you didn't
Oh
write.
yeah. I mean, I think you've got to be very careful and,
Oh,
look,
and we learned that lesson pretty hard. One of my poor
yeah.
customers, who is, I love them, and I took full accountability. I screwed up because we basically shipped so fast that we impacted their environment because we didn't realize that when we built all this code, we basically couldn't check. And then we wanted to release a new thing. It broke the whole thing. So
Oh
it
yeah.
caused this hidden risk that we didn't know. So now I've had to like go, whoa, as a team, like we want to go as fast as we can, but we cannot be breaking things and we need to have in these new ways of working. So that's another thing that like has been pretty obvious for us now is like everyone talks about all the good about removing AI and the tasks that are go, but there's all this new stuff that we haven't had to think about, which is why the work designer is really
Yeah.
important because they're also knowing, okay, and by the way, Bob, you're going to have to also QA your code like this. You're going to have to do this because you're going to have to release it like this because when we want to make a code change, we're going to be able to see all of this. So like there's just a really interesting thing that I'm learning right now that like costs me a lot of money and a lot of pain, but these are all coming back to that work design. Like I didn't do that properly. I went too fast
Yeah.
and luckily I have a really good bunch of customers who are right along with me who are prepared to like pioneer, but like we can't do that again, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think we've all got to be careful, and I think you know, within the product and things that are impacting customers directly, you got to have a good process around that because you can't just be throwing any type of change in code out there, and that could impact
Oh,
millions
and
of
it's like
dollars.
everything. It's not even coding is just the example. Like think about the invoices, paying people's
Yeah,
wages, like all of the things. There's just so many examples of like why you've got to like think about
yeah.
work
You can't. I
design.
mean, you can't get it wrong. You can't get
Exactly.
payroll wrong. People gonna be
Exactly.
mad.
Jessica, I could keep you here forever. I'm so
I love you.
grateful to have you here. I think everyone here will be grateful that you were here and sharing all of your learning. Folks, if you want to learn a little bit about more how the world is evolving, we've created a course just to kind of like share. I feel that responsibility to share. Jessica, thank you so much for sharing with us all of your learnings. We'll send a summary to everyone of all the best nuggets that she released and follow along. You can also follow Jessica as well on her LinkedIn. She's pretty active and pretty spicy and has a lot of hot takes. And she also interviews really cool people. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, everyone, for
Thank
dialing
you.
in.
Thank you for having me, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.